Hi, welcome back to It Takes a Village. This is a podcast where we talk about community connections and belonging and just try to bring as much as we can about the honesty of who we are as human beings, as people of faith, that we have questions about that faith, we have deep longings for wholeness, but a lot of times we live in a world that is kind of creating barriers to that kind of wholeness, right, Sarah?
Mm-hmm.
As we gather here and we are, talking to you and with each other on this post-election podcast episode, we know that there are many feelings, emotions, that in every election there's always a winner and a loser, and there are a lot of gray areas between that spectrum of winning and losing. I know that I have my own feelings. I have, as each of us do, I'm a person of faith. I'm a minister and I'm a person, I'm a mother, a spouse. We want to make sure that we are naming, right, that there are high, intense emotions and feelings, and then there are also projections that we all place on each other, even on us as faith leaders, that members expect certain things from us and we expect certain things from ourselves. So if this podcast is too much, and if the election and talking about it and the grief cycle is too much for you, just put this down and wait for a few weeks. Mm-hmm. We do want to share some practices and what we are trying to do to cope with these times, but know that we are here for you, that there are no wrong questions or answers or feelings, but we do have our own personal feelings that we'll be sharing some around this election. So thanks for being with us. How are you feeling today, Sarah?
I am feeling calmer today than I was yesterday. I had the chance to listen to some thought leaders that I really respect and have some good conversations. And that helped to remind me of what I can control and what I can't. Mm-hmm. And, I do think at times where there's a lot of stress, sometimes being with our loved ones in a very tangible, real way is so helpful, because I remember even on 9/11, I was a college student then, but I had a babysitting job that night. Mm-hmm. And I so wanted to cancel and just curl up in bed and watch TV, but it would have been, just endless repeats of the tragedy that had happened. Mm-hmm. And so instead I was with these two little girls that I knew from my job at a daycare center, and it was probably the best way I could have spent my night, just being with them. So I have a little bit of that feeling where, I do have distress over the outcome. I'll say that. And, just to repeat what Jenny said, the opinions we're sharing are not necessarily reflective of Countryside as a whole. We're sharing them more as our individual human selves. But because there is distress, I'm kind of looking for, what are the things that both feel real to me, not so much, just being on social media and engaging with people I don't even know in real life, and more being with the people that I have built relationship with and am in relationship with, and tending to those real life relationships.
Yeah, that can be so powerful to know that it's a choice, right? To disconnect from the kind of superficial things that we give our minds to. Social media, even if it's a routine that supports you regularly, right? Mm-hmm. Listening to podcasts or just checking in on different feeds and groups or thought leaders, it can be helpful, but it also that wheel of being on the hamster wheel of information, and in a time where nothing is going to change. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a lot of conversations of people saying similar things or different things about the same thing over and over. So if you think about the deep underlying question and longing for information, or we long for wisdom and for growth. And when things aren't changing, and you have this kind of reifying that we are in this stuck place, whether it's distress or hope, you just hear the same thing over and over again. You can stay stuck. Mm-hmm. So I've been doing the same thing, talking with different friends from across the country, whether clergy friends or just friends who I've known. My best friend, actually, from 6th grade, she texted me a picture of her dog. She was like, "What are you doing to cope?" And she, she's this beautiful golden retriever. And I was like, well, that's all I need, right? So just knowing that there are things that we know deep down that really do nurture and tend to our souls, to reach out for those things, whether it's talking with a friend or going on a walk or looking at pictures of cats, jumping around.
Yes.
Right. Those are super helpful. And they do tend to, I think, not just the deep wounds or distress, but to the things that we know that are always supporting of our spirits.
Yeah.
Right? As a parent, my kids have been sick, right, with the flu and pneumonia. And so sort of like practicing the presence of, Brother Lawrence, who's doing the dishes, right, as a practice in faith, it keeps him distracted, but also in tune to the refining nature of, being present with God over and over again. I felt like cooking, cleaning, giving my kids their medicine, checking their temperatures was like practicing the presence of health and wellness, doing the one thing, putting your foot in front of the other, right, to take care of. Not a distraction, but like the acute nature of what I'm called to do right now, right? I can't change other things, but I can be present to my children right now doing this. So we know that you all are probably having similar kinds of questions, like how can we cope? What are things that are helpful? And so we wanted to share some of those things with you today, not only that we're personally doing. I think one place to start for me is Parker Palmer. He has this little amazing book about vocation, but it's called Living the Questions. And for me, it's always a great place to start with what questions do you have, right? What is your soul asking? If it's a wound or a deep distress, what might you do in response? Living the questions means, if you're struggling and worried about different populations. I know I was with some church members last night, really worried about our immigrant community here. And one member said, I'm going to reach out and start trying to find out how I can advocate, how I can write letters, how I can be a DACA accompanist, all the things that she was feeling distressed about. She started to look for action steps. Maybe you need to go take a walk and meditate. But, naming some things that can practice the presence and also be an answer, an embodied answer to the stress we have, can help us feel unstuck in a time of peril or distress. What other things might you suggest, Sarah?
Well, I think I feel sometimes like a broken record, or that it sounds trite, or like that is not enough at a time like this. But really coming back to like meditation and practicing the presence of being in the now and being here. I know even we've gone through some breath practices in our staff meetings sometimes to begin and to center ourselves. And, sometimes it's like we'd say, well, let's do some breathing. I'm like, I don't want to do breathing, but
I'm already breathing.
Yes, I'm breathing all the time. Why do I have to focus on it? But It actually is so calming, just thinking about like our central nervous systems and all of the ways that really we can spin out and we can kind of lose ourselves when we don't tend to them. One of our members I was just texting with this morning was talking about regulating our dopamine. I mean, some of these things that, can feel sort of like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want even to slow down. I want to like engage and get fired up. But there's only so much of that I think we can do until we sort of crash. And so I've, for myself, like when I really get afraid and I go too far out in front, try to just coming back, whether it's setting a short timer on my phone for like 1 to 3 minutes and sitting quietly, and just then, also asking, one of my practices is always just asking God. And you can notice it when I pray, like just show us the next thing to do, the next right thing. And so, I tend to be like, I like to plan, but because so many things are so subject to change, really asking like, just show me the next thing to do, the next right action to take in love. And that feels really calming to me, to trust that God will reveal to me what is the right thing to do in my immediate surroundings, or who can I reach out to, who can I come across in the hallway that I can engage with. And that feels doable, versus these things that feel so out of reach and then make me just feel more hopeless and helpless.
Yeah, that reminds me of, I think it was Weems, but the Lewis Center, Sarah and I are both in this program through the United Church of Christ, the leadership program, the Next Generation Leadership Initiative. And one of our cohorts, I think it was through the Lewis Center and Dr. Weems, who has, which I also talk about all the time, the next faithful step. That God calls us to the next faithful step, and not to have all the answers or to see across the horizon. What is the very next faithful step that we can take? So I think that's such a good reminder, because so often we jump to these conclusions about what we're supposed to do. Right? I should, like the don't should on yourself. We should be kind of looking at these solutions, and we should be jumping to be embodying those solutions and making those manifest. And that might feel great. I mean, some of us are already doing advocacy work, and so taking that next step, that is their next step. Others, just to get off the couch feels like the next step for me is just, I'm going to put on some clothes today, or I'm going to do X. So knowing that each one of us has sort of our own question and we're on our own journey, and that next step looks different for everyone, but it can always start with breathing.
Yep.
It can always start with self-compassion. It can always start with asking more instead of feeling like you should have more answers. I know that a lot of us have different communities and friends and family members who are in real stress and panic right now. I know as a person who's a part of the queer community, people across the country, some of my best friends, my own child, woke up and said, does this mean that mommy and mama have to break up? Right? So some of us are dealing with things acutely that feel like putting your, one foot in front of the other is kind of all you can do. And then others are thinking, wow, how can I help fix those things? And then others are feeling maybe some sort of disconnect around all of those acute struggles that maybe are happening that maybe that not everyone's aware of. So I think in these moments, it's really, really important to name what it is that you need right now. What uniquely about you is either needing to celebrate with friends or needing to grieve with friends or needing to be alone, right? And renew the well that is your own spirit. I think that the real most important part is knowing that we are all made in the image of God, uniquely fashioned, and whether we are in pain or whether we are overflowing with joy, that we are not alone, that God is with us, and that we as a community, the us is the we. God is with us, right? And so we are going to have a divided community. We already do, right? Look at the electoral map, right? Look at the results of our election. It's pretty clear that it's, we have different thoughts and ideas about the values and how those values should be manifested from our government leadership. So some things are just kind of black and white. Well, I think this, I think that. These candidates, represent my values. Other things, there's a lot more gray area, right? It's about the emotional underlying kind of features that are accompanied with those decisions. So as we are here at Countryside in a community, we're caught up in this web of care, we're going to have different experiences and conversations that are probably rife with conflict, or we're going to have opportunities to dive in closer together so that we might support those in our community who are really struggling. I know the immigrant community is going to be facing a lot of challenges here in Omaha. My wife, Shannon's a teacher, and she texted me this morning and said she's talking with her principals and the social workers about so many of their children and families probably will be deported. So they don't even know if they will have a school, right, if those things happen. So these are things I think that are important to name because it's not about winning and losing or any of those things. It's about what happens next. Right. So the next faithful step can just be acknowledging that there are real people with real challenges and that we are going to be a community, a lifeline for some of those communities. And that's the call of the church. So whether that feels like the right thing for you or not, I think making sure that we state and we name how important it is to be a bold community of faith who has stood on the side of progressive, inclusive, radical love. That's really, there's only one way to do that. Right. And it's to lean into love. That means to support people who are the threat of pain and suffering, right? To support people who are looking for a spiritual home, support people who may not have a physical home. So I think for us, right, we know that we don't have all the answers. We know that there are always more questions than answers. But as we lean into the questions, as we call upon the faith that we have in a God who speaks into life, right? Speaks life into these dead, dry bones and brings things into existence that did not previously exist, that we have to also claim our place on that journey. And it can be, it can be the hardest thing you'll ever do to name that God calls us. Like, God calls us to be part of that. So know that Sarah and I are here. All of our church staff are here to support you. We have been having great conversations with those who've been coming in for coffee, Zoom in the evenings. So if there are ways that we can support you, please reach out and let us know. I know Sarah's been doing prayer with some groups. Any other things that you think might be meaningful for folks?
Yeah, I just would lean into the conversation, being able to talk to each other, to talk, to one of us or both of us, and to really lean on those practices. I heard someone say, like, we do these faith practices when we feel good so that we can really lean on them when we don't feel good. And sometimes it's easy to think like, oh, I got it when all is well. And people will sometimes even feel guilty for leaning harder on God when they're stressed. But that is okay. I mean, it's just human nature to think, well, when I feel really strong climbing this wall, I don't need my harness as much, right? When I feel weaker, I need to really depend on the safety and security that this gives me. And we all have our different relationships with God and how we feel about that, but certainly don't beat yourself up if you need to lean on God even more now, because that's part of the plan. God knows that we're going to do that and that we're going to need that. And so I would say, deepen into whatever practices usually support you, whether it's praying prayers that other people have written or that are, kind of memorized prayers of our faith, or different scripture passages that give you comfort and strength and hope or compel you to action. So many of Jesus' teachings, and, right there in the Bible, we're talking about how we treat the immigrant, the stranger, the disenfranchised person, the person on the margins. And so we'll continue to live into that as a community of faith and to what the gospel calls us to do.
That's so true. I mean, thinking about scriptures, I think one that resonates with me in these kinds of times is always, do not fear. Do not fear, for I am God. Do not fear. I have called you by name, and you are mine. Right? We are called, each one of us, as children of God. That means all of us. Right? And the difficulty there is knowing that that same child of God who is on the other side of a decision, the other side of a vote, the other side of a neighbor, the other side of a community or a religious practice, that we are, each one of us, called into that deep well that is the life spring and the wellspring of God. And knowing that nothing can separate us from the love of God, not even ourselves, I think is really important. And that's kind of foundational and fundamental to who we are as people of faith. So knowing that we are not alone, that we are God's, and that we are pointing as a village, right, to these practices that we know. I think the beautiful thing about village life is that everyone in the village belongs to each other, no matter what they say, who they are, whose uncle they are, what they believe. And village elders, they are sort of the guardians of wisdom in communities. And so it doesn't matter if a village elder who is not really your family member, but is an elder, and they tell you to go do something, you have to follow, and you have to be a wise steward of their wisdom. So I think we can learn a lot about understanding what it means to both be respectful of our differences and mindful of the neighborliness that exists in community, but also with that comes accountability, right? Holding each other accountable to the wisdom that we are sharing, to the questions we are answering and asking, and to the sacred selves that we're bringing to the table, which means that vivid, deep honesty. We can't really refine who we are if we don't bring our vulnerability, our true selves, and ask those questions. And hopefully not, the village elders, right, walking around. I mean, in my own experiences in Africa, it was just like walking around with, these tin cups, and they would, if you pass somebody, you're supposed to put money in, right? And this is the way that they take care of them. But they also have this sort of, snide little comments that it's part of understanding that we are part of this deep legacy of these ancestors in the faith who are always challenging us. It's like the generations past, when we think about past leaders in the faith or in our nation, they're challenging us to live into the fullness of our best selves, right? And so challenging us means holding us accountable to the best that we can bring, which is the first fruits of the love that we've been given. So many things to talk about, so many things to share, but we hope that you are tending to your own soul, and that the wisdom, right, that's growing within our community is also overflowing in yours. So thank you for being present with us. Thank you, Sarah, for joining in this conversation. And if you're still reading the book, How to Know a Person, The Art of Seeing Others Deeply and Being Deeply Seen, such a timely piece of literature, such a timely source of wisdom. So continue to talk about that with your village houses and your groups, and know that there are no wrong questions. There are only deep places to ponder the significance of God's love in our lives. So we'll hope to see you back here next week.
Thank you.